From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for Orange Alert, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma State football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OSU beat writer Scott Wright. Guys, Cowboys are off this week. First off week of the season. Comes at a pretty good time, frankly, after losing 3 of 4. Scott, they go to K-State last week. Not only lose, but lose pretty badly to the Wildcats. Give us a sense of the vibe around this program from what you saw Saturday, some availability midweek, even in this off week. What's just sort of your sense about where the players and coaches are right now?
Well, after the game at Kansas State, they were as down as we've seen them after a loss. Certainly, even Mike Yurcich talking about Taylor Cornelius and the struggles that he's had, the different things that have been going on with that. So, you know, he was more critical of Taylor than we ever see him of any player immediately after a game. He's typically a guy who says, "I want to watch film first before I offer an in-depth critique." He came right out and said that was Taylor's worst game of the season. So you could tell that emotionally he was in a different place than he had been after some previous losses. The players seemed to be the same way. Definitely more frustrated about this loss than they had been even previously with losses against Iowa State and Texas Tech. So you could sense a difference there. After Wednesday's practice, we got to speak with a few guys, and it was hit and miss. There were some guys who seemed to be their normal selves. Some guys who were clearly still frustrated with certain things and you know, not really excited about being in front of the media, to be honest. So which is understandable when you're in a season that's going the way that it is. So you look at the way this team is handling this. It's a good time for them to have a week to get over this emotionally, physically, to get some guys healthy that have had those little nicks and bruises that come through 7 games, and just hit the reset button and emotionally and physically get back on track. Try to salvage what is a season that seems to be slipping away.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, you mentioned after the game on Saturday, Mike Gundy preaching not panic, you know, not stray from what they've been doing. Barry, I think that hit a lot of people, fan-wise, wrong. I think people did not want to hear just stay the course from Mike Gundy or anyone else with the Cowboy football team. What's your sense of people outside the program and where they are right now as it relates to this team?
Well, I mean, most people are frustrated. Most hardcore fans are very frustrated. And Mike Gundy and the Cowboys are basically a victim of their own success. I mean, OSU's 4-3. They're not 1-6 like UCLA. They're not 0-6 like Nebraska. They're 4-3. The schedule's very tough. A winning record or even a bowl game is going to be a tough goal. But that's because of the expectations that they've built over the years. 3 straight 10-win seasons. You know, bowl games in what, 6, 15, 12 straight years. So it's a you know, it's a standard that they've set, and they're having a hard time reaching that, or not going to reach it this season. Everybody's frustrated. So Gundy's demeanor doesn't really help, but that's just the way he is. Everybody ought to know by now the guy's a little quirky. So you know, and when he says they're not going to make any changes, no quarterback, all that, doesn't mean they won't. I sort of think you really shouldn't believe the things that Mike Gundy are saying. There's no reason for him to not keep it close to the vest. No reason to help future opponents prepare. So it's just frustrating because of what has become the custom in Stillwater, which is really high-quality football. And this year, they're not playing it.
Yeah, we've seen problems really on all sides of the ball, offense, defense, even special teams sort of joining in the parade of problems. Scott, but let's focus for a second on the offensive side. You mentioned Taylor Cornelius did not have a great day throwing the ball at K-State, but maybe as troubling or even more so for the Cowboys was only 11 carries for Justice Hill. We'd seen him sort of continuing to get pretty steady and heavy diet of carries. Then a real big kickback. Obviously, when they got down, they were having to throw the ball. But even when they weren't in a must-throw situation, we didn't see as much out of Justice Hill. What's the situation there? Why did they struggle so much with that?
Obviously, a little bit of it starts with the offensive line, and they've got to be able to do things better to get him in better situations. But at the same time, they're throwing the ball to him less than they were a year ago. when he was running and having the success that he was on the ground. So it's an odd sort of juggling act that they're trying to pull off to try to get him in space, get him the ball, because we know he's their most dangerous player. But they're just struggling to find ways to do that consistently. We saw the Kansas game where they basically came out and said, we're going to run Justice Hill at you and you're going to have to stop it. He ended up having a great day, one of the best days he's had in a Cowboy uniform that day up at Kansas, and it turned out really well for the offense. Now they've had some struggles in the 2 weeks since then, and they've had 2 losses. So they know that they need to try to get him the ball. It's just a matter of figuring it out. Mike Gundy was asked both in post game and again after Wednesday's practice, what do you do to try to get him more involved? And he went back to the Kansas State game. Same thing he said in post game was, we had some open throws that we weren't able to complete. So would you rather complete an open pass or hand the ball off? Yes, you complete some passes, it opens things up, but still, there are times that it seems like you'd be able to get Justice Hill the ball and have him get into a rhythm and start to grind out some yards, which is when he tends to really start to succeed. He's not a guy that necessarily takes full advantage of an 11 carry opportunity. He's a guy that seems to be at his best when he gets about 20, and then that's when he produces the 130, 150, 170 yard games. So that's what they've got to work toward and try to figure out how to make that juggling act work.
Yeah. The thing that's been really interesting, and probably if you're a fan or even maybe on the team, frustrating, is just a lack of offensive consistency. There's just been no one game to the next that you feel like you get a sense of what this team's going to do. And Barry, that to me, when it comes to Justice Hill, if there was one area that you'd want to be consistent, it's really figuring out how to get him the ball. Mike Gundy talking way back before the season about, Hill being the best offensive weapon that they have. You got to average out to at least 15 carries for him. And to only get 11 in a game against K-State seems like that may be the area that they've been least consistent and really impacting their offense right now.
Well, it's just a conundrum because Justice Hill's had a nice year, but he's made a lot of yards after contact, or he's made a lot of yards after making a guy miss in the backfield. Those yards haven't come easy. Handing him the ball is not the answer to all the problems. Finding a way, once he has the ball, to get him loose has been a constant concern for this offense. And so I think that's what the offensive coaches are dealing with is, hey, we need to get him the ball, but he's not getting the ball in good situations where he can make yardage. He's getting hit in the backfield. He's running into a wall a yard deep past the line of scrimmage. So it's just it's a compounding problem. The offensive line has not developed the way that Gundy had hoped. The running game is not as good as it usually is around Stillwater. And as Scotty was talking about, the passing game has been off the mark. So it's a communal effort, and just saying, hey, let's get Justice Hill the ball 25 times is really not going to solve the problem if they don't solve some of these other issues that are limiting the production.
Well, Barry, you mentioned earlier an issue. Quarterback this last game was definitely, as Scotty mentioned, Cornelius not having his best day throwing the ball by any means, but up until that point had been average to above average, I think, if you looked at the body of work. But you mentioned this earlier. Could a quarterback change be coming? Is your sense that the Cowboys may be inching closer to that?
Yes, I think we'll see Drew Brown or Spencer Sanders against Texas. Now, that doesn't mean a start. I sort of think Taylor Cornelius is likely to start. But if the offense isn't humming, which frankly I don't think it's going to, then I think you'll see one of those other quarterbacks. Scotty'd know better than me which one is more likely. I don't have a sense of which guy is actually more likely to play. Neither one has played. They've reached the point where they can play them both extensively the rest of the year, and still redshirt both of them, as long as you organize it correctly. So I think there's no reason not to try it. It can't hurt. After the offense we saw in Manhattan, 12 points, 17 points against Tech, just a hit and miss offense. They were good against Iowa State. I give them credit. That's a good defense for the Cyclones. Cowboys put up 42. So they've had success, but it hasn't been consistent. And that's what, with the defensive issues that the Cowboys have, really no change from years past, really worse. This offense has to be better.
Yeah, and we found out how good those 42 points against Iowa State looked when, West Virginia, supposedly the best or one of the best offenses in the country, struggles against Iowa State. Scott, as Barry mentioned, you would know best if there is going to be a change. Is it more likely to be Drew Brown or Spencer Sanders? Do you have a sense of that? If they were to make some sort of switch or insert a guy mid-game, which one of those guys it would be?
I have a little bit of a gut feeling, but even people close to the program have disagreed with about who it might be. I think that Drew Brown would be the first option. Some people, whether it's their personal opinions or what they actually think would happen, it's hard to say. But some people think that Spencer Sanders is the guy. I feel that there's some legitimacy to what Mike Gundy said 2 weeks ago, whenever he claimed that Spencer Sanders is going to redshirt. He says that, of course, they were coming off a game where Taylor Cornelius had just got sacked 7 times. And he said that, Taylor Cornelius at 6'6", 232 is able to take more of a beating than a 6'2", 195-pound true freshman. You've got a guy who's had 2 ACL injuries in his high school career. I think that there's some concern about putting Spencer Sanders behind this offensive line. Now, whether they get to a point later in the year where they feel that they want to give him a shot to get some experience, it seems legitimate that you would want to try to do that with this redshirt rule to get a guy who is still tabbed as the quarterback of the future for this program to get him on the field. But I think specifically if you see someone against Texas, I think that Drew Brown would be the first option because he is a guy that's got the experience of playing Division I football and is a little bit more physically built well to handle the pressure that might come with the Texas defense. So I think that Drew Brown would be the first option. I think that there's a chance we could see Spencer Sanders down the stretch. At this point with 5 games left and some really good teams on the schedule, you've got to try to find a way to get 2 more victories, to get to a bowl game. Those 15 practices, it becomes sort of a coaching cliche eventually. But for a team like this that's obviously building for the future now at this point, those 15 practices for a bowl game would be a really big deal. And so trying to find a way to get 2 more victories could be really valuable.
Yeah, a lot of people focusing on the quarterback position and could there be a change there. But is there any options on the table, Scott, you feel like that might lead to personnel changes at any other positions? Could we see, some swaps in the defense or anywhere else in the offense? What's your sense of that during this off week?
I don't really sense a lot coming on. I don't think that they have another offensive lineman that they're comfortable with enough to put in the game. Now, obviously, if you get Arlington Hambright, your starting left tackle back, Tevin Jenkins is able to move back to right tackle, and Shane Richards can go back to being your top reserve. I think they're more comfortable in that scenario, but that's more a health issue than a personnel change. We've seen in the secondary that Jarek Bernard has really sort of overtaken Tabo Mwaniki at one of those safety spots. Mwaniki not really playing a whole lot at Kansas State. But other than that, you don't get the sense that there are guys just waiting for their opportunity to get on the field and show what they can do. You feel like that the core of starters that they've got right now are the guys that they're going to go with. And Mike Gundy on Wednesday night said if we had somebody that we thought was going to make us just a little better, we'd be playing them right now. And so it doesn't seem that way. Now, as you're getting toward the end of the season, you got those freshmen who have those 4 games. Maybe you start seeing some of those guys working on special teams, but that's about the only personnel change you get a sense that might come along.
Let me ask you a question, Scotty. The one thing OSU traditionally has done, even when they've got star wide receiver or wide receivers, they've used a lot of different guys there. This year, not so much. Pretty much the same core. Any chance we're going to see more of the young guy? I know L.C. Greenwood got in late in the game in Manhattan. We're going to see more potential young wide receivers trotted out?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Greenwood being one in particular that they actually ran him out a couple of times earlier. Once in a goal line situation where at 6'3" he can be an impactful player in that scenario. So I think that you will see some. Problem is you have Patrick McCaulifman, ACL injury. Trayson Wallace, ACL injury. So you've really dwindled down. You've got Braden Johnson, I think, is a guy who will get more involved as well. But you really, and another guy that should be mentioned, Tyrell Alexander, had been a wide receiver, moved to cornerback in the spring, and now is back at wide receiver. So maybe he regains his footing, gets a little bit more comfortable in that position, and gets more involved there. But they know that they don't have a lot of depth that they're using right there, and they know that they need to get some more guys involved.
Yeah, definitely some interesting conundrums. One thing that, as you talked about the defense, Scott, in the secondary, and sort of they seem to be locking in on younger guys in the secondary. One of the things that stood out to me from that K-State game was that there just wasn't much in the way of pass rush. Now, K-State's not going to pass it very much for starters, but Barry, that defensive line is really where it feels like a difference can be made. You had a nation-leading sack defense coming out against a team that's given up more sacks than anybody else in the Big 12. They only get 2 at K-State. It seems like that defensive line may be hitting a little bit, and who knows, maybe just the amount of pressure that's been on them. Maybe later in the year we're starting to see a little bit of wear, but that seems like that has to improve if you're going to see that secondary get younger and younger.
I'm going to give the D-line a little slack in Manhattan because they were getting gouged by the run game. Yeah. And you can't tee off and go after Skylar Thompson when Alex Barnes is running right past you with the ball in his hand. So that's been the strength of this team, frankly, has been the defensive line and then particularly the pass rush. But I'm not going to get too concerned about it. Against the Iowa State, they had a decent pass rush. They just didn't contain the new quarterback. Brock Purdy was mobile and running around and did a great job. And then against K-State, like I said, that option and Alex Barnes, going for a gazillion yards, really sort of put them back on their heels. Against Texas, against West Virginia, against Baylor, these are teams that Cowboys are going to need that pass rush back in full force, and it is a key to this season, key to that defense getting better, no doubt about it.
Well, we've made it to the end of Orange Alert without talking about the next opponent, but Scott, I'll ask you, Texas and their offense, their offensive line. We don't know about quarterback situation. We'll get into that next week, obviously, with them after Sam Ehlinger's injury. Ehlinger, I don't want to get in trouble with Tom Herman, whichever it is, sorry. But the OSU defensive line and the pressure they need to get on whoever is quarterbacking the Longhorns, that would seem to be a pretty important point as we look at that game next week against Texas.
Yeah, it absolutely will. That'll be with a quarterback that's not asked to throw the ball in a ton of pressure situations the way that they do. You want to get your opportunities to go after him, get him moving, get him out of the pocket, or just get in his face when he's trying to throw the ball. So that's going to be a crucial situation for Oklahoma State to be able to attack. And like Barry mentioned, Kansas State is so disciplined in the things that they do that you've got to stay disciplined in what you do to try to make your defense work, and that sort of takes some of the sting out of what you're able to do with your pass rush. So going against a Texas team where you need to go get to the quarterback, I think you'll see those guys turn loose a little bit more, and in Oklahoma State's case, you're hopeful that they have a little bit more success, because that's going to be one of the keys to keeping yourselves in the game.
All right, it's homecoming next week at Oklahoma State. That game against Texas, a 7 o'clock kick on ABC. So a good long open part of the day for the parade, for the walk around, for all the things that homecoming is about at Oklahoma State. So we'll have a lot more coverage of that game and the week once we get into it. But that's it for Orange Alert this week. So be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.